Okay, shall we get on? Gentlemen. So, welcome back. So, for the second half, in the first half, we looked at particularly the games where we can't play until the end because it would take either too much space or it would take too long to evaluate all the ends of ends of my search tree. Now there is even if we do this restriction to a certain meaningful depth of the tree, we might not be able to finish the search in an efficient time. So there have been efforts to make this these min-max algorithms more efficient, and one of them is the alpha-beta pruning algorithm, which I will explain in the first half of this, the next 45 minutes. And then we look into the imperfect information games, where we turn the imperfection into perfect, the assumption of perfect games, and use a sampling algorithm. So, two organizational things that came up in the break. The first one is that there is a Piazza instance on the Canvas page, and that is a very, very useful discussion tool. So whenever you have a question that is more general than just the personal matter, whether you can come or whether you want an exception for that or that. Whenever you have a general question, please post them on Piazza. And we try to answer them in a very short, the shortest possible time. It's also that it doesn't end up in my mailbox, which is usually the biggest bottleneck of a course, but it ends up on a site where also our TAs can answer the questions, and even more importantly, where your colleagues can answer the questions, because in many cases, you have better answers than we have. And I know that this already worked in the beginning for where do I have to register and so forth, and I saw that some of you gave answers to that, which is much appreciated. So please use this for posting questions and answering questions as well. That is also, I think, the place where you should find teammates for the practical assignment. So I know that there are some exchange students on the one hand, but there are also other people who haven't got their partners yet for the teams. Please get together. What you can also do is you look at the groups. I don't know whether you can see the other groups. Maybe you can't. So maybe if you have a group where there's only one person, you can try to contact that person and ask, shouldn't we team up? So please try in the next days to make this, I think I have now 80 groups where a lot of them are not full yet with 3 or 4 people. Please make sure that within the next, say, 4 or 5 days, or that we really have our groups finalized for the final project. And the second thing I wanted to say is about the support tomorrow. So we have on a relatively short notice have found one more TA to help with the practicals, and he's going to be available tomorrow afternoon after the lecture for urgent technical problems. And as it was such a short notice, you might not get all the detailed answers that you're looking for in these sessions directly, but we will then take all your questions and answer them by email and so forth. So still, if you have technical questions about the game engine, about Python, about installation, about paths, whatever, feel free to come along to this session tomorrow afternoon, and I will post the room numbers on Canvas later today. So there is the opportunity for you tomorrow afternoon to get help. And I can promise you that anything related to the programming side of the course, you're better off asking your questions to the TAs rather than to me. Yeah? So let's now get into the point where we can take the perfect min-max algorithm, but run it in a more efficient way. And that's the alpha-beta pruning, which is one of the early achievements of AI, which all of the AI students and all of the computer science students should have seen before. The problem is, of course, that if we apply this min-max algorithm per level of depth that you want to investigate, you really get an enormous amount of additional nodes that you have to explore. And if we have 5 cards as we have in Schnapsen, that's not so much of a problem. Maybe we can do the full min-max algorithm on the tree. But if you have 6 cards already, it goes already up 1 more order of magnitude. And so games like Skat or so, where you have 10 cards and lots of unknowns, it really becomes very difficult to do this efficiently, the min-max algorithm. So that's why we have some algorithm for pruning, the alpha-beta pruning, and that is basically to try to identify redundant places of the space, of the state space, that we do not need to explore anymore. So we're not looking at all the nodes anymore. And while I said before that we are, while doing the estimation on the evaluation function, we trade off with completeness of the algorithm. Here we try to do this without losing any information. So it's an information loss-free kind of making our algorithm more efficient. And how we do this is by always noting the possible interval of the possible values that a node could have. So if we start with an algorithm with a state like this one, we have no information, so the value could be between minus infinite and plus infinite. Yeah, so no restriction on the value at all. And if we do our exploration of the depth first algorithm until we go to the first leaf, this next node, still we don't have any information. But now it starts, we get information. We know, namely, that this has a value 3. What does it buy us? It tells us, namely, that as this is a min choice, that all the values that will be returned up to max will be 3 or smaller, because min would be stupid to choose a value here that was higher. It chooses the smallest value. So without knowing anything about those 2 nodes, leaf nodes, I know that the value that min will return will never be bigger than 3. Yeah? But then I know as well I'm not sure this is true, actually. Huh? Should be the other way around. So I have to look into that. I think I don't think we can already know that the value should be bigger than 3, because if there would be more information and there would be a 2 here, then so this is only true at this stage. Now this is true. Yeah. Now this information is correct. So my animation was incorrect because I was having the 3 too early on the slide. At the moment when I've explored only this one, I only know that at this node, min will choose 3 or smaller. Now I don't get anything smaller than 3, so I know exactly now, after looking at those 3 nodes, that min will return the 3. So that was a standard min-max. We didn't learn anything more. But now the next step, we know already something for max, because one of the values that min will give biggest is 3, so max will always choose a value of 3 or bigger. Yeah? This is only at this stage of the search that we can assume that, not the one before. Yeah?
Couldn't that lead to unexpected behavior? For example, if you're playing against a human player and you not choose the smallest value that you've already explored, and you will pick up that map that you didn't really explore. Because usually making the assumption of the fact that min is behaving optimally. But if it wasn't.
If it was not behaving optimally, it would choose a value smaller than 3. Sorry, a value bigger than 3.
Yeah.
And then, let's go back to step. And then it wouldn't, this is a state. This is something we know. That's something we have already seen. That this is the value for this last node. So independent of the strategy, there will never be anything meaningful bigger than the 3. Even if, because if min plays not perfectly, then we still know that in the decision, between the decision of min and what it could have played, that this is the optimal thing to choose from. So I'm not 100% sure whether my argument works somehow, but I know theoretically that it doesn't change. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah?
Is this about a perfect information game, or is this partial?
This is a perfect information game. Yeah? So basically, the only thing here, it works like the min-max algorithm. We're still trying to propagate the values from down here up to the node, but we're now trying to avoid to calculate things. And the argument that I bring you is that at the point where we only explore 3, we know of this interval that the value could be 3 or smaller, because min might still find something better. But at the moment where we've explored all of those 3, then it has to be 3, so the interval 3 to 3. And then Max has already some information, namely that there will never be a value for x smaller than 3. Because if all the other nodes down here would be smaller than 3, Max would simply choose this one. So it will never be smaller than 3. So now if we go down the next possible move that Max could make. Yeah? In the first instance, we don't know anything about it, so we have our interval minimal min infinity to plus infinity. But now we find this node. Yeah? So basically what this node tells us is that min will always choose something that is 2 or smaller. So it will choose this 2 if x and x are bigger than 2. Then it will choose this 2. Or something smaller if one of those values is smaller. Yeah? So as soon as we've seen this node, we know that here we will never have anything bigger than 2. But then we know that this smaller than 2 and this bigger than 3 isn't compatible. Because, so all the values that min will choose here are smaller than 2, and x has the opportunity to choose something that's 3 or bigger, so it will never, ever look at this node. Yeah? Is that clear? Which basically means that I do not have to check those 2 nodes. I don't even have to look at them. Even if they were -5 or 3,000, they wouldn't make any difference to the calculation that x will always choose this path. That's the crucial idea of alpha-beta pruning, where basically the alpha is this left-hand value and the beta is the right-hand value, and you always try to keep the intervals between alpha-beta, between the nodes, the child nodes, compatible. And at the moment where these intervals are not compatible anymore, namely here, this interval has no intersection. When that happens, you know that you can prune the rest of the tree. That's alpha-beta pruning and nothing more. So, just to continue the example, we have now saved on calculating those 2 nodes. We didn't have to look at them. And as such, these 2 nodes are obviously not very interesting. But suppose now, because we do a depth first thing, that here is a long tree underneath. We wouldn't have to look at anything underneath this tree. So we can cut off a lot of search space just by this example. In the next case, we find a huge value here, so we know relatively little. We only know that min can choose something 14 or smaller. So the interval -infinity to 14, and the interval that we had before here, which was 3 to plus infinity, is now restricted to 14, because we only have those these three children of the root value. So x will always be able to choose something between those, among those values, and as this one cannot be bigger than 14, we know that the interval of x can only be between 3 and 14. So at each of the steps of the investigation of your search space, you update all the intervals of your nodes. So now we have, because we found this 14, we have a strategy here which we know already that Max can maximally end this game with values between 3 and 14. So if you, for example, would say you need 21 points to win the game, we could stop here again. We could stop here as well, because we know that x will never get more than 14 points. Okay, so now we find the next value for min. This value gets smaller, so we now have the interval minus infinity to 5, and that means that we have to update our interval for x to 3 to 5. And if we have a 2 value here, we get the exact value of 3 to calculate. So basically we did a search here that is gives us exactly the same result as before, but we had to explore fewer nodes than we would have before if we had done the proper min method. Yeah?
I think how to define the interval at the second level. So in the first one we have 3.3 done, and the second one is minus infinity. Why is it minus infinity here? And because we have something unknown.
Yeah, it could be smaller. So we haven't adapted it. You only close this min move when you know all the values. Yeah? You say sorry, I don't get the question. Yeah? So if there's something higher, suppose there's something higher, then this would be a value, say 5 or 50 or 300, and then min would choose the 2.
No, I'm talking about the next level. So this level, min would choose 2 values. But then below 2, there would be the layer 4 and then layer 3.
Yes, so these are values that are known. So these would be my utility values or my estimate values at the leaf nodes. So these are now leaf nodes. But you can do the same, of course, if you do a depth first, you will finish with parts of the tree. So I recommend you look at this algorithm. Sort of explaining those algorithms on the board is always something that sort of twists my head, and yours probably as well. So look at this algorithm and try to calculate it on a piece of paper yourself, how it works, because then I think the logic becomes very clear. The idea is, again, we want to return a state and an action based on this maximum value, but now we don't have only one value as an argument, but we have 2 values, and we start with minus infinity and plus infinity. So that's basically the measurement of the interval for the root node when we start. Then it's about calculating this max value for the children, first for the root node, and then for the children, and so forth iteratively. And again, if I have a terminal test, then I give it the utility value or the heuristic value. If I do it, if I have already cut it by some cutoff time, I give it the end value. So that was the 4 that I gave to the node. Otherwise, I instantiate my value v. And then I try to find all the maximum values of the subtree. And if I find something that is bigger than this one, which is in the beginning is the first thing to do, then you return the max between these values that you had and the value that you got from the calculation of the tree underneath. So basically this is the state, the moment where you update your intervals assigned to each of the states in the tree. And then basically you do this for max, and in your recursive call, you have your opponent playing, so you do it for min. And then the min function is exactly the same, apart from the fact that you call the max play. And remember what I said yesterday or 2 days ago, that the fact that you call max here as a min player is due to the rules of the game that I defined before, namely that you always switch who starts. So min, max, min, max, min, max. If you would implement this for Schnapsen, you have to call the player whose turn it is. So it's not automatically max, but it could be the player who won the trick before. So it could be that it's 5 times the same person trying to maximize. After one trick. So it's always when you play a card, it's always your opponent playing first, but then you not necessarily always call your opponent, but you could be playing again. So the order of these calls depends on the rules of the game. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah? And my recommendation is really take a tree, one of those in the exercises on the weekend, on the Friday in the working group, and try the algorithm as it's here, fill in the values, and that is basically the best way of really understanding how this works. And then you have to implement it, and it shouldn't be that complicated. Yeah.
I'm confused on when to call min or max first. So is it the max function call for the leading agent, so the one that starts the game? As you said, that might be the same person every time, but okay, maybe not. But is it that person that needs the tree to call max, then try to maximize the points, and then the opponent to minimize it?
No, you have a max player and you have a min player.
Right.
And the max player, suppose the max player starts, so then the max would call the min function. Yeah. But then the decision on whether to call max or min depends on who won this trick. So if max wins the trick, he plays first. But if min wins, then it would be min. Yeah. So going back to the algorithm, important theoretical property of this algorithm, as opposed to the idea before where we say we cut off after depth 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. Important is here that the pruning does not affect the results. So if we look at this tree here, is exactly the same result, this 3, as we would have before, with the only difference being that we haven't explored a number of those those subtrees. So it's only more efficient and doesn't change anything in terms of the result. And now here we had the example where we only looked at the leaf level with the crosses, but obviously the power of this is that it can also affect really subtrees. It's very important that if you apply this in a naive way, it might not really help that much. But if you order your moves up front according to what you believe are the most promising moves in the evaluation, then you could find out earlier maybe the highest value in your min function that would already allow you to prune other things. So a good move ordering is very, very effective in this pruning. And if you would have the perfect ordering, the perfect ordering of the moves, then you could reduce the time complexity to the half of the exponential factor, which basically means that if you do alpha-beta pruning right, then you can look twice as deep in your algorithm as without it. And that's a lot. So I remember that when you apply alpha-beta pruning to, or min-max to these kind of games, we're typically looking at a possible search depth of not more than 5-6 levels. And whether you look forward in your game 3 or 4 levels or 6 or 7 levels, that makes a big difference. So it really is worth looking at the effectivity of your search algorithm here. So alpha-beta pruning is one of the core algorithms, and the best way to really understand it and to see it is on Friday and on a piece of paper, calculated through given an example. So we have min-max, which explores sort of the full space of possible games. You play the games till the end, and you can then evaluate whether there's a winning strategy or not. If you can't play the game until the end, you can cut it off after some time, and then you evaluate each of the states, each of the end states, and estimate the quality of those and replace the utility function by this evaluation function. So that sort of prunes the length of the game. We can make the algorithm perform better by these alpha-beta algorithms, which will not change the results, which is very handy, very good. But still, this is not all of it. And if we look at Schnapsen, the big problem is that we have a lot of breadth in our search. So now we haven't looked at the problem of the search, the branching factor. We have looked mostly at the depth of the tree, the length of the game. But in Schnapsen, the length of the game is not that much of a problem, because the game is always 10 moves plus the response of your opponent. So we always have 20 length of maximally 20 moves. That's not much. That's something we can maybe understand. The big problem with Schnapsen is that we have the factor of uncertainty. We have no idea which of the cards my opponent might have. And there are 14 cards that are unknown. Let me see what I have this. I get into that later, how complex this Schnapsen really is. But the problem is that we have all those different states that we would have to explore, and you can't really argue over this. So there's a theory behind that, and I'm trying to explain the theory now on how to deal with this kind of imperfect information, the partial information. And the idea here is that we try to look at all the possible ways that the world could look like. And these possible ways the world could look like are the belief states. Why would you need that? So we use it now for our game, but in AI this is a very, very typical situation where you have only partial information about the world. And that is related to the fact that you can never model everything that is supposed to happen in the world. So you always have to be open to eventualities. So you have to have always a contingency plan. In many cases, you're exploring the world, and you have to deal with situations where you explore the world and you don't even know what's happening before. And in many cases, you have no idea where you are or what happens after your actions, because you don't have the appropriate sensors and so forth. So it's a very, very general AI problem, and also the approach to it is very general. And the approach to it is easily explained if you look at the hoovering example. You want to clean this room, you want to clean the room next to it. So we have those 8 possible situations. Unfortunately, we have no idea where we are. So we have the partial information that these are the possible situations to be in, and but we have no ways of finding out in which room we are. And also we don't have any sensoric information about whether there's anything dirty or not. So the question is, in this world that is not observable for us, can we still make sure that everything is cleaned? And can we still find a good strategy for cleaning this? And can we still use state space search for doing this? And the answer is yes, we can. But we don't do the state space search over states where we have a state as 2 rooms and a cleaner and a hoover is in the room and there's dirt. But we now have our space over belief states, so the possible states that we could be in. So if there are S states, then we have 2 to the power of S belief states, so possible states where we could be in. And this is the situation then to represent the world in terms of belief states and how we could still make a decision, still find a strategy for cleaning those rooms on the basis of a search space paradigm. And basically this is the situation where we don't have any information. So these are the 8 possible states. So our belief state down here, up here, has 8 members. But the one thing we know, and that's now where this becomes interesting, is that when we move from any of those situations to the left, then in half of the situations we can't do anything because we're already on the left-hand side, but after moving to the left, we can only be in any of those 4 positions, namely in the room to the left. And the same if we move. Ooh. I have no idea what's happening here. I'm not available. I'd probably be 15 minutes late to that meeting, I guess. So basically you're here in no information state. You move to the right to one of those positions where you now know that you're in the right-hand room. From this room, from this position, if you do the cleaning, you know that the position on the right-hand side is now clean. Whether the Hoover is there, you also know, because the Hoover has been on the right-hand side in this position. So you also know that once you're in this situation, all you need to do to clean, either it is already this situation, where everything is clean, or you have to move to the left and clean, and so that's this move, and then you have to clean, and you are sure that you end up in a situation where everything is clean. So basically we have applied exactly the same algorithm, but now not on the individual states here, but on the belief states. So all the possible situations state we could be in a state. So now let's move to Schnapsen, and we're almost finished as well. So basically what we have to do now, or what we can do, is that we represent the game of Schnapsen with the first phase where we have the uncertainty over our opponent's cards by just looking at all the possible cards that my opponent could have. So all the possible belief states. So I basically have 14 cards that are unknown. Let's look at how this is represented in the first place. So this is all the 20 cards that we have in the game. And if you look at the game engine, I think that is more or less the way that it's represented. So this is a game. You have a player X has this card on the hand. With X, this is if it's an H, it's still on the hand. If it's a W value, it's a 1, so it's you have it already 1 after some tricks. If there's nothing, then it's in the pile. And in the pile, you might have different positions. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the unknown cards that you can still take out of the tree. So basically, this is the game state, and it's perfect. We know everything. But if you have other player, you only get this part of the game information. So unfortunately, you're not told what this card is. The game engine, of course, knows that it is in your opponent's hand. But for you, it could also be here. It could be at any point in either the stock or in your opponent's hand. So these 14 cards, because the trump card we know, so this is the trump card, we know it should be somewhere here among those. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So it's the trump card is there as well. We know what the trump card is, but we know our own 5 cards, but we don't know what happens to the other 14. And they could be distributed in any way over your opponent's hand or the trick, the pile. And that obviously means that we cannot go through all the belief states like we did with the simple Hoover case, because there are simply too many of those belief states. So the theory of this is very nice. We could have a perfect information game where we don't know in which state we are, or we could still systematically, in theory, go through all the belief states and do our search, do our min-max game, all the fancy alpha-beta pruning, but there are far too many of those in each of the cases. So we have an enormous branching factor. So this will unfortunately not work. So the problem is that although it is a simple game, theoretically we would know how to deal with it by simply taking all the belief states and then doing a systematic search through all the possible games that could be played with the cards I have on my hand. It's not efficient enough. So basically what you do, or what we have to do, so this is, to be very honest, this is the end of applying min-max algorithm on the first phase of Schnapsen, because it simply will not work, because either we don't know what the following states are, or there are too many of those. Still, in the second phase, we can apply our min-max. But we have to do something with this huge amount of belief states that we could have, all the possible games our opponent could play against them. And the way this is done is by a very simple method of sampling. And that is, if you go to the Git repository, to the Schnapsen repository, this is what the RDeep algorithm does. It does what's called, more fancily, Monte Carlo sampling, perfect information Monte Carlo sampling. And this is, strangely enough, or it's still one of the best strategies that you can apply for these kind of games, even outperforming expert human players simply by doing the following. That's called a rollout. And the rollout is, as I said before, now we are turning this imperfect information game into a perfect one, where we just assume, let's suppose we are in one of those belief states. And then you can do different things. You can, first of all, do just a random game. You just have your opponent play any card she wants. And you do that 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. It's very efficient because you know the cards. And you take a random sample of belief states, and you have a certain successor, so a certain card that you could play, and you just play 1,000. In principle, what you do with this Monte Carlo sampling is you just have your agent play, you give it a card, and you play 1,000 random games against possible cards of your opponent, and even possible moves of your opponent. And then you check, do I win or do I not win? And you can do that deterministically, because we know the utility value of each of the games. And then you average over them. And you choose the one that gives you the highest average. So this is a sort of a random rollout. That's the most simple strategy, and RDeep does this random rollout. But this rollout could also be improved. So you could also, for example, say, I assume perfect information, and then I have a game with min-max and with my alpha-beta pruning, so that basically the quality of my sampling and of my estimation of how good my algorithm performs becomes better. And this is basically the same idea that AlphaGo used in their Go implementation. So because you can't do the complete exploration of your search space anymore, what they do in every case in the exploration phase is that they do a random sampling, but they do something more clever than. And that's what they call Monte Carlo tree search, is that you have the search results of those random rollouts determine the structure of your search tree. And we get to that in the third week. For now, I think it's good enough for you to understand really how easy, how simple this algorithm is. You are in a certain game state, so it's your turn to play. You look at all the cards you have, and you play through all the possible games to a certain number, your sampling size, and you average over how good is this game. And even if you apply a random sampling and a random strategy of playing your cards, your opponent plays a random cards, this gives you pretty good results. And that is the one that is already in the system, and that is the one that you should have to beat at the end of this course. Write something that performs better than this RD algorithm, which is just simple, perfect information, Monte Carlo sampling. So to summarize, for phase 2 of the game, of the Schnapsen game, where we have perfect information, we know exactly which are the 5 cards of our opponent, what are my 5 cards. There is no stock where I can get new cards, so the number of cards decreases. We have a perfect example for applying min-max, and we can apply alphabetic pruning. We don't even need to apply alphabetic pruning, but we can simply play out the games, and we will always win when there is a winning strategy if we use if we use min-max. Unfortunately, the phase 1 increases the complexity enormously. And perfect information Monte Carlo sampling is, in this case, an easy solution. It's a very intuitive solution as well, but it's surprisingly difficult to beat. Next week, we will add to our game engine knowledge about the game, and we will look whether that helps to improve the quality of our agents. And in week 3, we will include some learning from experience. Yep. See you tomorrow.